Hello and welcome to the RotoWire WNBA show, where we talk about fantasy basketball. I'm Jason Shebilske, and I'm joined today by RotoWire Chief NBA Editor Alex Barutha. Today, we'll talk about this week's action from around the WNBA, including Napheesa Collier's foot injury last night. We'll also offer several players you can consider picking up for this weekend. And finally, we'll preview some of the storylines we're keeping an eye on for this weekend's action. Those looking to test RotoWire's full slate of tools can visit rotowire.com/try for a free trial. And if you have any questions during the show, you can ask them in the comments and we'll get them answered. If they're asked live, we'll talk about them live on the show, but you can also ask them afterward and we'll get them answered in the comments.
Well, let's jump right into it, Jason. We have a lighter slate than usual this week. What are some of the biggest news stories that you're either paying attention to or you felt like came out of this week?
Yeah, I think you have to start with Napheesa Collier's foot injury from last night's game against the Sun. She suffered a non contact injury late in the third quarter and was unavailable to close out the matchup. Coach Cheryl Reeve didn't have an update after the game, but it's possible that Collier is further examined today or tomorrow. In short, if Collier is forced to miss relatively substantial time, this has the potential to be one of the most impactful injuries of the season. The Lynx have surprisingly been one of the best teams in the league over the first half of the year. And for as much as we talk about the acquisitions of Courtney Williams and Alana Smith, Collier remains the cornerstone of the team, and Minnesota's outlook is certainly bleaker if she's facing a sizable absence. And not to mention, she's on this year's Olympic roster, so this injury has the potential to cause issues in multiple areas. And it's also possible that the injury turns out to be minor, but I think it's important to highlight just how much the league's landscape will be altered if Collier is unavailable for any amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely used to this, like on the NBA side as well, where it's like some non-contact injury and there's no update, and you're just kind of sitting there. You try to watch a video and play like YouTube doctor. You're like, I don't. Maybe it's a week, maybe it's a month. Who knows?
Right. Yeah, and
Um,
especially in the WNBA where we don't have the official injury reports, it's always
yeah.
anyone's guess as to what's going on.
Yes, I mean Collier. She's been ridiculous. I mean, she finished fourth in MVP last year. This year, averaging 20, 10, and 4 with 2 steals, a block and a half. Like you just can't replace that kind of production outright. Like if there was somebody on the team that could do that, you would be the best team in the WNBA. So I mean, for you from a fantasy perspective, is this just as simple as like, okay, Alana Smith, Bridget Carlton, Dorka Juhas, they're all just gonna have to see more minutes and they'll all have more fantasy value, or is there like one specific player? Like I think this is who I'm adding.
Yeah, like you kind of alluded to, there isn't really just one player who would be able to fill Collier's shoes. Like you said, if they would be able to do that, they would just be a super team from top to bottom. And unfortunately, that's not what Minnesota is. Dorka Juhas is a player that I'll be watching if Collier faces a multi-game absence. Juhas is top 20 minutes of playing time in two appearances this year, and she posted a double-double in one of those outings. She was productive as a rookie last year, averaging 6 points and 6.5 rebounds in 24.2 minutes per game. Bridget Carlton, as you mentioned, has also been solid as a starter recently, and I would consider her a safer option to add since she's already proven to have fantasy value this season. Uhas is a player that I consider as maybe having the biggest jump in production, but Carlton has the potential to be one of the top front court options in Minnesota if Collier misses time. It's also worth mentioning Diamond Miller, but she's continued to see minimal playing time after returning from injury, so I don't think that the Lynx really feel comfortable giving her sizable minutes just yet. Uhas's rostership is a little bit interesting. She's rostered in 39.6% of leagues, even though she's had really inconsistent production. To compare, Carlton is rostered in 36%. So both of them are a little bit more than some of the other players that we'll mention on today's show, but it's still worth checking the waiver wire in your league to see if she's out there. Also, unless you have a player on your bench who simply hasn't been contributing, I'm probably waiting on Uhas until more news surfaces about Collier. Carlton, I feel comfortable adding outright, but Uhas, I'm probably waiting on.
That makes sense. And I mean, these are not the only players that might be available on the waiver wire as well due to injury, because we also got some unfortunate news out of Atlanta. Jordin Canada dealing with a finger injury that will cause her to miss significant time. What do you know about that injury?
Yeah, so Atlanta and Jordan Canada herself just can't seem to catch a break this season. Canada missed the first 14 games of the season due to a hand injury, and she had been back on the court for just 4 matchups. After having her playing time monitored in her first 2 appearances, she averaged 39, 39 minutes per game over her last 2 outings. I think it's important to highlight her toughness as well, as a report surfaced today that she sustained her finger injury against the Liberty on June 30th, and then she went on to play 40 minutes against the Sky on Tuesday. So she was out there for every minute with a broken finger. But after her diagnosis, she'll be sidelined through the Olympic break. This adds to a long list of injuries for a Dream squad that has just been decimated by injuries recently. In addition to Canada's absence, the team is without Ryan Howard due to an ankle injury, while Ariel Powers is also dealing with an illness that will sideline her Friday. Haley Jones will really need to step up in the coming weeks, while the team also signed Destiny Henderson to a hardship contract Friday, and she could see decent minutes off the bench as well. The Dream have still shown some glimpses of promise in recent matchups, despite Howard's injury, but it feels like this will be a very inconsistent team without both Canada and Howard in action, both in terms of wins and losses and just overall fantasy production.
But before we continue, if you enjoy this video, you enjoy the content, you like the WNBA stuff, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Also, if you're watching on video, you can see rotowire.com/try. You get the free look behind the paywall. It's not just for WNBA. You got a fantasy football draft coming up. Anything in fantasy, that free trial will get you access to everything. You mentioned Haley Jones being someone who needs to step up. I mean, she's proven, I think, to be a good passer. The rest of her game may be a little bit of a work in progress, but with the potential for added minutes, added usage, is that like a must-add situation, or do you kind of want to wait and see how the rotation and the usage shakes out?
Yeah, so in this case, we know that Canada will miss multiple weeks, so we at least have that as a blueprint to go off of. And we have, like, we can see earlier in the season that Canada missed significant time, so we saw Haley Jones's usage. Jones has maintained a starting role even after Canada returned to action, largely due to Ryan Howard's continued absence. So I would probably consider Jones a must add player at this point. She's been inconsistent over the last few games with Canada's workload increasing, but she should see plenty of usage leading up to the Olympic break, as she'll once again be one of the top options in the backcourt alongside Alicia Gray. Jones totaled just 16 ESPN fantasy points over her last 2 appearances, but leading up to that, she logged at least 20 ESPN fantasy points in each of the 4 games in which Howard was out, and Canada was either sidelined or on a minutes limit. So I would expect to see Jones around that 20 plus fantasy point threshold once again, now that Canada will be sidelined. And that's something that if she's on a waiver wire, really regardless of how many teams are in your league, if you can expect 20 plus points from a player any night, like that's someone who you want to really consider adding. Jones is also rostered in just 5.6% of leagues, and she's been dropped in a few of my leagues in recent days. She's definitely worth picking up, especially in deeper formats, and she's available in a lot of leagues as well. Maya Caldwell has also seen solid minutes off the bench since joining the team, but has had somewhat inconsistent production. If you're really in need of a player, Caldwell is someone to take a flyer on, but I wouldn't really make Caldwell a priority add at this point, whereas Jones I would really prioritize on the waiver wire.
I These are not the only injuries that have happened in the WNBA. Obviously, are who else are you targeting based off of that, other than the players you've already mentioned?
Yeah, we've mentioned the Sparks a few times after Cameron Brink tore her ACL. One of my top pickups this week is Stephanie Talbot. She seems to have established herself as the more solid contributor over Lee Ueru in Los Angeles. Talbot has topped 30 ESPN fantasy points in 2 of her last 3 appearances, and she was dominant on both ends of the floor Tuesday against the Mystics, as she tallied 17 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 steals in 30 minutes. Meanwhile, Ueru has been held to single digits in her last 2 appearances. Talbot will probably retain a starting role given her recent production, and she's still rostered in just 10.6% of leagues. So I expect that to rise considerably in the coming days, and I would add her while you can.
Yeah, Talbot's someone who I think is probably a bit underrated as a passer, can hit threes. Like she can do a lot out there. And yeah, the increased minutes will help a ton. Um, so uh, putting aside the injuries, players who are just performing better or worse than usual, who do you notice that is stepping up lately?
Yeah, so we've cycled through a few Storm bench players in terms of players to add this season, and Sami Whitcomb has been the latest player to step up. She's posted double digit fantasy points in 3 consecutive appearances. Whitcomb was also somewhat inconsistent over the first half of the 2023 season, but she had stretches in which she was among the league's top contributors, and she was a solid option for Seattle down the stretch. I'm not really expecting that same kind of upside as part of this 2024 squad since there's a lot more talent around her now. But if she can maintain consistent playing time off the bench, she's worth streaming consideration and could be someone to stash in deeper leagues.
I mean, for Wickham, the steals and threes upside is just ridiculous. I mean, this season, 2.7 steals per 40 minutes. That's basically league leading. And she's taking 10 threes per 40. Like I mean, that's like Steph Curry, Clay Thompson, type stuff. Just ridiculous.
Right. And last year she had 8 games where she made at least four threes. So even though the Storm really revamped their roster during the offseason by adding like Skylar Diggins Smith, Neka Ogwumike, and they still have Jewel Lloyd and Ezzy Magbagor, Sammy Whitcomb is someone who, if they need a spark late in the game, like she can come off the bench and really provide that perimeter presence that not a lot of bench players around the league and just around basketball in general can generally provide because I don't know, there she just has a really complete game and it's good to see her getting the opportunities lately.
One player that I've seen step up lately is Veronica Burton on the Sun. She got her first start of the season during Thursday's win over the Lynx with Ty Harris sidelined due to an illness. Burton had 9 points, 4 steals. That's huge, obviously. 3 assists, 2 rebounds, and a block in 29 minutes. This wasn't like completely out of nowhere, though. She had been starting to see more minutes before that, averaging about 20 per game over her prior 3, compared to all single digits in all of her appearances before these past 4. She got some of these minutes. Like she wasn't taking major minutes away from anybody in particular because she was only getting about 10 more minutes a game, 15, something like that. So it's a little bit from Tiffany Mitchell, a little bit from Rachel Banham. But the thing is that like the Sun are second best team in the WNBA right now by winning percentage. They're actually last in assists per 40 minutes, and that's Burton's best contribution as a basketball player. Her passing eight and a half assists per 40 minutes, 2.4 steals per 40 minutes. She's definitely someone to keep an eye on. I think, especially if Harris's illness lingers, which is why I almost mentioned that. I don't know if I mentioned that's why she missed the game, but she had an illness. I don't know if there's necessarily, I mean, do you think that it doesn't seem like based on their roster and how good they've been, there's a lot of potential for Burton to start seeing like 30 minutes a game and be a starter and anything like that. But if it feels like if she can continue being around that like 15 to 25 range, that there are going to be some nights or some weeks where she is definitely useful in fantasy.
Right, especially with how productive the Sun have been as a team this year. I don't really foresee them trying to rock the boat too much because it's been working for them so far. And I think that they probably view Burton as a bonus contributor, someone who can maybe take the load off of some of their veterans as the Olympic break approaches and potentially afterward as well. Burton didn't really come out of nowhere. She was in Dallas for 2 seasons before this, and she had glimpses of production. And as the Wings dealt with injuries leading up to the season, we expected Veronica Burton to maybe see an increased role, but then she was surprisingly released before the season. So she's proven that she can have that production. I don't really see her getting like maybe 30 plus minutes per night, but if she can do what she's doing and more so split the load with Ty Harris, I think that both players can have a fantasy relevant role. I still probably prefer Harris over Burton when both are healthy, but Burton is proven is capable of having that like fantasy upside on a given night.
We got a question from the audience here, from Nachos Gone. I love the username, by the way. Have we gotten any updates on Collier? Unfortunately, no, we haven't. But I mean, Jason, that's definitely the question on everybody's mind right now.
Oh, I agree. I wasn't working last night. It was the 4th of July, but when I saw the Collier news come across on my phone, I was already racking my brain for the fantasy implications and just hoping that she's okay, because you hate to see an injury to one of the league's top players, and it feels like that has the chance to really shape the second half of the year if she is dealing with a significant absence.
Well, let's move on to the weekend's games. What are you looking forward to leading out of the 4th of July?
Yeah, starting with tonight's slate, I'm really intrigued by the matchup between the Dream and the Wings. The Wings are at the bottom of the league standings, but Atlanta is coming off a 2-game losing streak, and they'll have to play without Ryan Howard, Ariel Powers, and Jordan Canada, as we mentioned earlier in the show. The Wings are actually 4.5 point favorites at home, despite being in last place, and I'm probably steering clear of betting on the winner of this game just because a lot of random things can happen in the WNBA, and this feels like fodder for having that happen. But this should really give us a good idea of where each team stands. I think that if there's any team that is coming up on the schedule, given Atlanta's current situation with all their injuries, I think the Wings are probably one of the few teams that they would want to see. But as we mentioned so often, there are really no easy games in the WNBA. So I think that I'm probably considering it a toss up.
Um, we have on Saturday. You have the Liberty as 8.5 point favorites on the road. Um, I know these teams have faced off 3 times this season. What have you seen from that?
Yeah, so the Liberty have won by double digits each time, including a pair of 36-point wins. There have been 2 occasions where they've won by exactly 36 points. One of them was in Indiana. The Fever have looked more cohesive in recent weeks, which is understandable. Caitlin Clark is going to be the cornerstone of this franchise for years to come, but they also have a lot of young players in Aaliyah Boston, Melissa Smith. They just got Temmie Fagbenley back. So they're hitting their stride and they have the talent to contribute. It's just a matter of synergy at this point. We see so often just around all of basketball where a team can have so much talent, but if they don't have like the chemistry to work together, not much will happen. Uh, the Fever have looked a little bit more effective against some teams lately. They look good against the Sky, and against the Mercury, they pulled out a win. But they still have trouble against the teams at the top of the standings. And the Liberty lead the league with a 17-3 record. So I'm expecting another win by the Liberty and probably by double digits. If there's a betting line that I'm looking at for this weekend, it's probably New York at -8.5.
Hmm. And then we also have they're not back to backs, but the Sky and Storm play tonight, and then they play on Sunday. I know the Storm are 10 point favorites. Um, is there any interest of you of like, do you think there could be an underdog situation here? Maybe the second game, who knows? What is your read on this game?
I think that is a possibility. The Sky have looked inconsistent this year, but they've also had some cases where they've really kept up with some of the top teams. One such instance is their matchup against the Lynx last week. They wound up losing by 8, but they were leading for a decent chunk of that matchup. When I saw the Storm being 10-point favorites for tonight's game, I'm expecting a similar line for Sunday's rematch just because the way that sportsbooks treat the WNBA, a lot of times they aren't necessarily fine tuning things, but it feels like a little bit of a wider spread than I would expect. It wouldn't surprise me if the Sky forced a series split by winning one of these games, or if they at least made things competitive in one or both of these matchups. Regardless, it should be an entertaining weekend. There aren't like too many of those slates that we'll have coming out where it's like you get the 3-game night on Friday and then 4 games on Sunday. But it's good to have those leading up to the Olympic break, and uh, we should enjoy them while we have them.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, for people who are watching who are coming from like maybe an NBA standpoint, a 10-point favorite in the WNBA is a lot wider than a 10-point favorite in the NBA. Like in the NBA, teams are scoring 100 to 125 points. Average WNBA score for a team is about 80, 82 points, something like that. So when you see a 10-point favorite in the WNBA, that's more like a 15-point favorite in the NBA. So you sort of have to like adjust your thinking based on that. Like, is this really this much of a mismatch? But yeah, that's something to keep in mind.
Right. And Seattle, they definitely have the talent. We mentioned earlier that they had a solid offseason getting Skylar Diggins-Smith, Neka Ogwumike, but they've still shown some signs of inconsistency. So I don't know. If you're looking for a line that you can maybe exploit, the Storm could be one of those matchups with betting on the Sky.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that does it for our Friday show. Alex, thanks so much for filling in for Kieran today. I'll be back this Monday at 1 p.m. Central with Kieran back in action. Be sure to join us then. Thanks for watching.